afternoon and welcome to our Pi Day of Giving virtual speaker series event, Facing Hate in Canada, and happy International Women's Day. Before we begin, I'd like to start with a brief land acknowledgement of the traditional territory in which we are gathering today. Our university campus is situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas, a branch of the Greater Anishinaabe Nation, which includes Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. Because everybody is turning in with us remotely across a variety of cities today, I don't want to forgo this important element of reconciliation, so I'd like to ask everyone to take a moment and think about reflect on the traditional territory that you're on, the treaty that it's covered under, and the relationship that you share personally with the land. As a university community, we are dedicated to increasing our awareness, our understanding, and our gratitude for the lands we share. My name is Jody Cowan, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at Ontario Tech. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, happy International Women's Day. Today's session is something I'm very excited for. It's with Dr. Barb Perry, and it's the first of our second week of our hosting our Ontario Tech experts to share their research and spread the word about our Pi Day of Giving. This will help us raise funds for our Student Relief Fund, which will help students who are experiencing financial need due to COVID-19. I would like to take a moment to thank those of you who made a donation upon registering for today's session. There will be time following today's presentation for brief question and answers, so I'd like you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen at any point during Barb's presentation, and we will do our best to get to them all. These sessions, as you could have seen, are being recorded, so they will be posted to our website where you could watch them again and share with friends who have not been able to make it with us live today. Also like to mention that last week's sessions are also live on our website, so be sure to check those out. I would now like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Barb Perry from the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities. Welcome, Barb, and thank you for letting me know that my mic was not muted. Dr. Perry is the director of the Center on Hate, Bias, and Extremism here at Ontario Tech. She is a recognized global authority on hate crime and the primary national authority on right-wing extremism here in Canada. She is the current and founding co-chair of the International Network on Hate Studies and a well-known expert among many media outlets, including The Agenda, CBC, The Current, Globe and Mail, and The New York Times. Dr. Perry is a regular consultant with Justice Canada and Public Safety Canada, the RCMP, the Canadian HIV/AIDS Legal Network, and with social justice organizations. Her work extends to policing diverse communities, building resilience among marginalized communities, and broadly issues of diversity and justice. Dr. Perry is helping to frame the field and foster global education and support victims of violence. Now I would like to take it over to Dr. Perry for her presentation today, which is Facing Hate in Canada. So please take it away, Barb.
Thanks for that, Jody. I really appreciate it. Glad you could all join us today. It looks like we've got a fairly good crowd, so that's really encouraging to see this kind of engagement with Ontario Tech. I'm not a mathematician, so I don't understand pi, and I don't particularly like the kinds of pie we eat, but I do care very much about our students. So happy to be involved today to bring awareness to the university and to the needs of our students as well, who struggle financially at the best of times and are really facing challenges in the context of COVID. So I'm going to share my screen, and I hope this works first time. I'm getting better at this, I promise. And it says I'm screen sharing, so we'll hope that you can all see that. So yeah, I am going to talk about facing hate in Canada and really looking at multiple manifestations of hatred that we've seen emerging and growing in the past few years. So this comes out of my own work, both in hate crime and in right-wing extremism. So you'll see indicators of both of those areas. But I think it's really important to start with sort of the environment, the climate that enables hate, or as I call it, normalizes hate in the Canadian context. And of course, we start with Trump because, we like to lay the blame at his feet. We really have seen a dramatic increase in, many different kinds of hateful conduct since he began to run, since he started to campaign for president of the United States, with his narratives that vilified a whole array of communities. But it's also important to note that, we've had our own challenges in the Canadian context, and some of these narratives have also infected our political discourse here at the provincial level and at the federal level across the country. So you see some examples here of public figures who have embraced and shared and circulated similar kinds of attitudes. And I'm going to draw attention, for example, to Legault, the Premier of Quebec, who on the anniversary of the murders of 6 Muslim men in Quebec City could say, I don't think there's Islamophobia in Quebec, so I don't see why there would be a day dedicated to Islamophobia. So that dismissal of the experiences of so many people, I think is, one of those signs that I'm talking about, one of those pieces of the narratives that contribute to a broader sense in the general public about these diverse communities they might be referring to. We've seen it intrude into other kinds of political frames. So Faith Goldie, who at the time was the golden child, if you will, for the far right movement in Canada, ran for mayor in the last municipal election and garnered around 20,000 votes. In fact, in the GTA, over 40,000 votes went to people who were running on explicitly racist far right platform. So really disturbing. And of course, Maxime Bernier, whose People's Party of Canada, especially when it first emerged, became a real magnet for members of the far right, the extreme right in particular, who appreciated and applauded and celebrated, in fact, what many have understood to be his anti-immigrant narratives too. So that does trickle down into public opinion. And we've seen this in a number of public opinion polls across the country in the last few years, with an increase in attitudes that seem to suggest that there is some appetite or some sharing of those kinds of sentiments that I've described. So for example, the first one, 33% feel freer to publicly express views of other races or ethnicities. 25% feel that prejudice against Muslims has become more acceptable since 2014, and 15% feel the same way about anti-Semitism. One of the most disturbing findings here is the very last one, where we see that 37% feel that immigration is a threat to white Canadians. So you see some sort of nationalist discourse coming into public opinion as well as political narratives. And that then can translate for some people, again, a very small proportion, but for some people into an increase in hate crime. That is criminal activity, violent or otherwise, that is motivated by prejudice or hatred. And you see, 2009 to 2016, fairly level rates, no real dramatic increases or decreases. But then comes 2016. What happened in 2016? Oh yeah, Donald Trump was inaugurated. We see a dramatic increase, 47% increase in police reported hate crimes. And that is unheard of, to see that kind of leap in any sort of a category of crime. So it goes to show that there's something circulating, right? Something that is playing into those sentiments and allowing those sentiments to manifest in violent ways. In the following year, we saw a bit of a decrease, 13% decrease. Then 2018 to 2019, those data have just been released, and we see another uptick of 7%. We expect that for 2020, we're going to see probably an even greater increase than that 47%. For example, the Vancouver Police Department are reporting for 2020 a 700% increase in anti-Asian violence, specifically in 2020, in the context of COVID, of course. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So just to break it down a little bit, what that looks like, most of the offenses are at the lower level of the spectrum. General mischief is the highest number, but it's important not to dismiss that. Hate crimes are what we often refer to as message crimes. That is incidents that are intended to send a message, not just to the individual victim, but to the whole community. You're not valued, you're not wanted. And so when you see this kind of the commonality of general mischief. So this is graffiti, this is vandalism. These are things that are often very public. Might be on overpasses or on street signs, or even on the streets. We've seen that. We've seen painting on the street. So that really is visible to everyone and does have an impact on the entire community that's targeted. So I think it's really important not to dismiss that because they're at the lower end. If you look up the spectrum, if you look at violent crime, in fact, they're a fairly significant number. If we collapse uttering threats and common assault, that's a fairly high number as well, even relative to general mischief. Looking at the distribution in terms of motivation, and this is very consistent from year to year, and across Western nations, where race and ethnicity is most common, in particular anti-Black hate crimes. Religion is next most common, and that is most frequently in that category is anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish violence, followed increasingly closely by anti-Muslim violence. And then, of course, sexual orientation, which really is about anti-gay violence. This next round of data, we'll probably see data in there about violence against trans communities. Gender identity has only recently been introduced into the data gathering methodology. So we will see, some stats around that probably for 2020. I said that we'd talk a little bit about what we see in the context of COVID. And in fact, yes, we have seen a dramatic increase in all forms of discrimination, including hate crime perpetrated against Asians, but also against the Jewish community. We'll talk about that in a moment. So you see some results from some polls here that people reporting the extent to which 40% feel that they're treated with less respect than other people because of their ethnicity during COVID-19. 34% have been called names, 30% personally threatened or intimidated. And the impact of that is, you see here, 61% have adjusted their routines, changed their ways of being and acting in the world for fear of being targets. So real dramatic impact. And as the last one suggests here, particular fear about what the consequences might be for children, in the schoolyard or in the streets as well. So just some examples here from across the country. And you can see the first one and the last one here really targeting older people, which is particularly heartless and cold. So an Asian man knocked over, harassed and berated in a store and knocked over. And the last one, a Vietnamese woman, being sort of a target of an ongoing campaign over several days, and finally hit in the face with the rock that was thrown at her as she opened the door. Again, you see here in Vancouver, what I was referring to earlier, a dramatic increase in anti-Asian crimes, 717%. So it really is, a worrying trend that we're seeing as Asian communities are scapegoated around the problem of COVID. Important to note, though, that anti-Semitism is also increasing because of parallel conspiracy theories around the role of Jews in perpetrating and perpetuating the virus. So the state of Israel created the virus. The state of Israel is deliberately spreading the virus. Jews are uniquely disobeying self-isolation. Comparison of Jews to disease-spreading rats, a very old, millennia old image associated with Jews. So using those conspiracy theories to reinforce anti-Semitism, fear, anxiety, hatred towards Jewish communities, including instructions by those in the formal far-right movement to consciously and explicitly infect Jews if they find that they are have themselves tested positive. Just want to take it up a notch now. We referred there to white supremacist far-right groups. And in our first study of the far-right movement in Canada, published in 2015, we identified over 120 incidents of violence associated with the far right between 1980 and 2015. Just to put that in context, during the same period of time, we could identify only 8 incidents of violence associated with Islamist-inspired extremists, which belies the emphasis that we place in one place as opposed to another. And just another illustration of the risk associated with the far right. You see here the murders just in the context of mass murders over the past few years. 19 homicides associated with people influenced and shaped by far right extremist ideologies. I'm quickly running out of time. So what I'll say about this is, it's important to recognize the diversity of the extreme right movement. It's not just those old traditional neo-Nazis or racist skinheads or KKK, but a whole array of other pieces of the movement coming to the fore, including, really important to acknowledge on this day in particular, the manosphere, misogynistic elements of the movement that we're seeing come to the fore, so visible. Some intersection with the incel movement there. We're also seeing accelerationists, like many of those who were leading the insurrection, if we can call it that, in the US on January 6th, an anti-Muslim contingent, and of course, those who describe themselves as the alt-right. So it's a much broader movement now than it was even in 2015 when we did our first study. We're also seeing a growth in numbers. So you see here in 2015, we identified just over 100 active groups across the country. You can see the concentration here, which is still quite similar, but now we're estimating closer to 300 active far-right groups in the Canadian context. So, threefold increase in a very short period of time. So what do we do? This has sort of become my mantra: educate, be accountable, and resist. So education, like what we're doing here, so important that we understand the risks, the threat, the dynamics of hate in its many manifestations so that we can confront it. Public accountability comes back to those political leaders, right? Is holding them accountable, not just to not enable these kinds of narratives through their own discourses, but also to challenge it where they see it and when they see it in any context across the country. And then resist, of course. Obviously, we need to continue the kind of resistance that we've seen on the street and online, where people are pushing back against these sorts of narratives, where people are challenging the discourses that feed into hate in its many manifestations. So I would encourage each of you to, take this education we shared today, to use that to hold our public figures accountable, and to use that as the basis for your own resistance and your own pushing back. So I thank you for your time, and really excited to hear what questions you might have for me.
Thank you very much, Barb, for that very informative discussion. I'm Alison Broadworth, one of the colleagues in the Advancement Office here at Ontario Tech. And your conversation, the data you've shown us, one question that comes to the top of the mind here at the list is, why do you think it's on the rise? Why is hate on such a rise here in Canada? We can kind of make assumptions about the US, but why here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a constellation of factors coming together. We're also influenced by the Trump effect, as we've called it. Many people have called it. He lived on social media, on Twitter, and we saw those same Twitter feeds. So that has affected us. But we've also had sort of our internal problems. We've been shaped by similar European discourses, especially in Quebec, which follows much more sort of European trends than American trends. What else do we have? Well, obviously, in the current context, the pandemic has shaped that over the last couple of years, in particular. Economic anxiety, right, around the pandemic, but even before that, especially in Western Canada, where you saw, there was a concentration of hate groups. Anxiety around threats to the oil industry and the energy sector there. In our own hometown, around the automotive industry, and all of those sorts of things leave us looking for answers, leave us looking for scapegoats. So we're vulnerable to those sorts of narratives that place the blame on someone else and provide us with, easy answers to the problems that we're experiencing.
Another question here. What approach do you suggest for tackling misinformation, especially regarding, the example you just gave us of vaccines and, the rhetoric about why we, do we accept it? Do we not accept it? Why aren't we getting it? Who's getting it? How can we handle that?
Yeah, great question. I think it's particularly troubling and difficult and challenging to really counter it amongst those who are dyed-in-the-wool conspiracy theorists. I mean, they just will not listen to science, won't listen to logic, won't listen to reason. Where we can intervene is, amongst our friends, our family, our associates, our friends even online, who are saying, I just read this, I just heard this. And, engaging ourselves and engaging them in critical digital literacy. And I think that's one of the big challenges for us, not just for youth, but for adults as well, that we don't reflect on the things that cross our screen, right? We take it at face value. We might share it with others. We may, slowly over time, because we're exposed to it on a regular basis, we might actually absorb some of that ourselves. So I think that we need to, be very reflective about our social media, what we read, what we see, what we hear from our friends, and stop and think before we share it, and just go back to the source, right? Challenge, identify, where these ideas are coming from. Are they credible? What's the counter argument? So do your own fact checking and encourage others to do the same.
Not quite exactly the same vein, but how do we help or change narratives where perhaps individuals are having conversations within their own homes or their own networks, or perhaps influencing their own children along these negative views and misinformation and so on? How can we help that kind of idea so that we can make sure that they're getting access to the right sources? Or how do we get that through in a way to our children and others?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? That's why, it's sort of it's allowed to fester, because we often are surrounded by individuals or groups, or online or offline, who might share these views, right? If our parents are racist or homophobic or Islamophobic, and repeat these kinds of narratives, it's hard for us to challenge our parents. So that's obviously where education becomes so important, for these kinds of conversations to be part of the curriculum. It's not something that we can deny. I did a presentation for OSSTF, secondary school teachers, a while ago, and a couple of teachers have actually reached out to me and asked me to speak to their classes, because the teachers weren't aware of these issues, or sort of were aware of them but didn't understand them, and so if they're not in a position to understand them, how do they then how do they have those conversations with their students? So they're bringing me in to talk to their students, so that the kids build resiliency and the capacity to recognize it when they see it, and to challenge it, or at least resist it when they see it. So education is so important, formal education, but informal education as well. If social media is where we're living, and that's where we're seeing these narratives, that's where we also need to be introduced to and confronted with counter narratives.
Well, and education, was another comment that came through the questions. How does education play a role, and how can, the work that you're doing and the center is doing, how can that help us? How do we help you help get correct the fallacies, and how do you deal with that when we know that some of them are so much more dangerous than others?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the sort of thing that we do. This is our bread and butter at the center. Is obviously we're a research center, so we create that knowledge, but then we also mobilize the knowledge much more broadly. And so we work with schools, we work with workplaces, we work with municipalities, trying to sort of get that message across, almost in a sense of sort of train the trainer, right? Give the people we meet and speak with the skills that they need and the knowledge that they need to take back to their workplace or their students or their peers, whatever the case may be, so that they can share that message as well. So I think that, you know, the more exposure we can give to the kind of information that we're creating here, and awareness and knowledge we're creating here, the more effective we can be in terms of, to use a current term, vaccinating folks against this disease, right? This pandemic of hate that we're seeing as well. So yeah, I think that that exposure is really important.
There certainly is enough to keep this conversation going much longer. I know that we are closing in on the time that we had committed to having for today, and I think it looks like Jody has made it back through the magic of technology. So I would like to turn it back over to Jody, and thanks very much, Barb.
Okay, thanks.
Gotta love those technical difficulties, so I apologize to everybody. Thank you, Barb, so much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been a great session, a great panelist for us to have here with our audiences, and especially on International Wednesday. So thanks so much for being a part of today's session.
Thank you.
As I mentioned at the very beginning of our presentation, this is our 4th day of giving, where we're celebrating the infinite possibilities for our students. This year has been difficult for everybody, and our students are no different. We were able to switch to virtual within 1 day of the declared pandemic, and we're really looking forward to getting back to campus soon with our students. But those students need help more than ever, so I really do hope that you will make a gift to help support our Student Relief Fund, to help students who are experiencing financial needs due to loss of their jobs or reduced in part-time hours. Like I mentioned, all donations will be matched dollar for dollar by the university. Thank you to those who have already made a gift. I'm so excited to share that we have given away nearly $400,000 to students who are experiencing need, in addition to a regular scheduled bursary and scholarship program. I'd like to also thank Kemp Travel Group for their generous sponsorship of today's sessions and our Pi Day of Giving campaign. I hope you'll spend your lunch hour with us for the remainder of the week. We have incredible sessions coming up, and you can learn more about who those presenters will be and what their topics are at our website on ontariotechu.ca/Pi Day. Thank you again, Dr. Barb Perry, for joining us. And before we say goodbye, I would just like to share a brief video with featuring our students and the infinite possibilities hope to make on the world. Thanks so much for joining us.
On March 14th, you can help support my dreams.
Knowledge is infectious, and my dream is to teach.
My dream is to educate young students about the benefits of physical activity so that they can adopt these practices into their daily lives.
My goal is to contribute to innovative technologies that leave a lasting impact on society.
On Pi Day, join our circle and support students like me.
I want to help save people from natural disasters.
I want to be part of engineering projects that help make tech be your best friend.
I want to develop technology to aid in space exploration.
I aspire to design aerodynamic race cars to shape the future of Formula One racing.
Just like the values of Pi, opportunities for students like me are endless, so join us.